Hi, Misha here, and I can always tell when it's time to revisit a old favorite because people start asking if we've done a video or pointing us to videos. And also, for the first time pretty much all year, I had an actual batch of these come in. So let's talk about the Austrian Steyr AUG. And this is the version that they're currently shipping. And it's in one of the newer configurations and colors known as mud, which is kind of an interesting combination of flat dark earth and olive drab green, or so I'm told. I've had a long-standing love affair with the AUG going back. In fact, this time of year around Thanksgiving always kind of makes me think of the AUG, because that's the first time I saw the AUG A3s in stock anywhere. That was back when Sabre was doing the whole thing for Steyr before they partnered with Vautour and FN USA to make the A3 series. So with that, let's dive in. Packaging for the A3 M1 is very basic. You get a relatively small manual. It is on glossy paper, at least. And you get one factory 30-round mag. When these first came out, you could often buy them in a full kit with a tactical bag, additional mags, cleaning kit, but I haven't seen that in a long time. And it comes in a very basic cardboard box with cardboard inserts. It doesn't even have foam lining. Heck, the Bullpup itself isn't even in a plastic bag. One thing I'll say, Steyr definitely didn't waste money on the packaging. Just thought I'd point that out. Then again, as I've often said, I'm not a box collector. This is a current A3 M1. And M stands for multi-configurable, at least according to Steyr USA. Pretty standard version. We have the 16-inch barrel with the folding foregrip. I can do it here. Adjustable short stroke gas piston system. Originally these had 13mm European type threads, but in the last few years they've started threading them 1/2x28, which has pros and cons, but probably is more of a good thing than a bad thing in the US market. Have a short rail here. Like I said, this is in the mud styling. This is a fiberglass reinforced polymer stock chassis foregrip. And this is the version that feeds from standard Austrian Steyr mags. Now some ask why they didn't make this use AR mags from the get-go. Simple. When this was created in 1974, the AR mag wasn't a standard. In fact, 30-round mags were very new to the AR-15 M16 itself. Even when it was adopted in 1977 and first put into service in 1978, the AR mag just wasn't a STANAG thing. And frankly, Steyr thought they could do something better. This mag is clear so you can get a round count. These are very durable, easy to load, and they're actually very lightweight. And of course, being mostly polymer, they're rust resistant and very inexpensive to mass produce. The trick with polymer, the molds cost a lot of money. The dies, the molds. But once you have that cost down, the individual mags, very cheap. So you don't have to try to keep old mags going. Once the mag starts to wear out, just chunk it and get another one. Now, of course, for a long time they've offered the AUG NATO version, which does accept STANAG AR-15 mags. And all you have to do is switch to the NATO buttstock. Easy enough, but you do lose two things. With the Austrian mag version, you have an ejection port on the left side. So even though the AUG, and I know it's technically AUG, but we all say AUG. even though it's not fully ambidextrous. The charging handle stays on the left side. You can install a left-hand bolt, which will eject to the left. Also, one new feature with the A3 is we have an external bolt release, something the A1 and A2 did not. However, if you do use the NATO stock, the one that takes standard mags, you lose these. The left side ejection port is gone, and the external bolt release latch is gone. So it's up to you if it's worth that. And of course, the NATO stocks cost quite a bit more. I've honestly never thought it was worth it. So with that, let's go back in time, talk about A1, A2, the original A3s, some mottos, and talk about what makes the modern A3 M1 different from what came before.
Let's see if this works. Didn't hold open, but it did work.
We go back in time 40 years. Here's my Steyr AUG SA, a semi-automatic version of the Steyr AUG A1. And this is a relatively early one with the open flash hider. And it doesn't have the internal updates like the roller and the bolt. But history, well, here's another gun we've talked about on the channel. The Austrian Steyr Sturmgewehr 58, STG 58. This was a license-produced version of the FAL made in Austria, based on the West German Gewehr 1, G1, firing 7.62 NATO. It was a good gun. The Austrians liked it. It was well suited for their needs and their situation politically in the 1950s and 60s in Central Europe. This one, of course, is on a DSA receiver, and again, we pointed it out. It was powerful, accurate. They didn't mind the cost associated, but it was also heavy, long, and ergonomics weren't the best, and it really wasn't controllable in automatic fire. Even if you could, ammunition was heavy. Now, the U.S. was fighting Vietnam, and everyone took note of the new M16 that was making a splash there. More people even took note of its fresh 223 cartridge. At that time, it wasn't really known as 5.56. This would include those in Austria, including Colonel Stoll, who was part of getting this gun created. That's why the flash hider is actually named the Stoll flash hider. A team was started under his direction, and work began as early as 1968, and they played around with a lot of new concepts and ideas. And by 1971, they had a pretty good layout of what they wanted to do, and so they started working on building prototypes, which were ready by 1974, and the gun was ready to enter trials and testing by 75. They wanted something more ergonomic, lighter, shorter, more adaptable. Also, yes, cheaper, easier to produce, more user-friendly than the FAL, essentially. And that's where we get the AUG. And it went up against some interesting guns during its trials phase. I bring up the trials and testing because of this rifle here. Now, they were hoping, the Bundeswehr was hoping to adopt the new Steyr gun, but they needed to test it against what was out there. Of course, they had their STG 58 as a control. I mean, if the new gun's no better than what you have, no reason to switch. We see this in America. Whenever they wanted to do something, they always had the current service there to be a baseline. And since it was inspired by the M16, they obtained the latest versions from Colt, which were the A1. Here's mine. And also there was the VZ58 from Czechoslovakia. And of course, this fired 7.62 by 39. That was mostly done just to see what what the Warsaw Pact had versus NATO, but also politically, Austria, well, by the 70s, it was certainly NATO aligned, but in the beginning, Austria was supposed to be neutral, much like Switzerland. It's a whole thing. The politics of post-war Austria are very fascinating. Anywho, they wanted to give a nod and kind of test it up against what the Warsaw Pact might have, and I suppose instead of going to a Kalashnikov, they thought this is the best thing they had, so they picked it. And of course, Czechoslovakia was a major arms exporter for the Combloc group, the communist nations. That's why they actually sent quite a few guns to Egypt. Anyway, it was there. They picked it. It went up against these. And what they essentially found was that the new Steyr Bullpup design was as reliable and dependable and durable as the rest. They felt it was more ergonomic, lighter, and shorter. Even though it has a 20-inch barrel, like the M16, it's considerably shorter. And since they use alloys and polymers for the most part, it's quite a bit lighter. So it passed. They found it especially was more controllable on automatic fire compared with the Sturmgewehr 58, and they could carry the same number of rounds for a lot less weight, or carry for the same weight a lot more rounds, including using the polymer mags. And really, Steyr pulled out all the stops here. You have the synthetic stock. They could be colored. Originally, it would be green for the military, but they would also offer black. In the butt plate, there's a space for a cleaning kit. Very nice synthetic magazines. They work well. No metal in them except for the spring. They did want to have a trigger guard so that you could use it with gloves or mittens or whatever. Famously known, it has this quick change barrel system, and it's a true quick change. Has an adjustable gas piston system. Of course, Steyr has always been well known for its barrels, cold hammer forged, chrome lined. Now they used a 1-in-9 twist, because in the 70s 1-in-7 didn't really exist yet. 1-in-12 was the standard, but by the time this would go into service, they were looking to adopt a heavier projectile. Long story short, they went to the 1-in-9 because it could adequately stabilize both M193 and what would become M855. Now, originally they were going to do more or less traditional adjustable iron sights, but by the time this was ready to go into service, they went to a 1.5 power Swarovski made scope, and it's integral to the casting, to the frame. It does have backup iron sights on top, but the rifle was intended to be used all the time with this combat optic. Pretty darn forward thinking for that era, frankly. Also very forward thinking, the AUG could be easily and very quickly disassembled without any tools, not even a bullet tip. And it strips down into 5 components: the stock, the bolt group, the trigger pack, the sight housing frame, and the barrel, and a 6th component if you count the magazine. And you can do it extremely fast. A very good modern concept, but for the 1970s, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying everything worked out that they tried. Some people might argue, and bullpups are not without their detractions. A less than stellar trigger, less than easy mag changes. Optic, the major issue here, if it were to break, it's integral, so what do you do? It does have a forward assist. It's a non-reciprocating charging handle. Has a forward assist built in. It's not swappable, so it's not a fully ambidextrous gun, but it's more lefty friendly than some, like the safety is a cross bolt style, so, you know. And the mag catches right here. The mags are kind of an interesting hybrid of rock and lock and drop free, mostly drop free. Sling swivels, you know the deal. It's an AUG. So it did well in testing and trials and was accepted. It's a Sturmgewehr 77, STG 77, and The first ones were given for advanced field testing and trials in 1978, and by 79, the military started to re-equip and redeploy with it. So by the 80s, yeah, it was the hot new thing. It's a bullpup. Now, Steyr did not come up with the whole bullpup concept. Far, 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 far from it. But this really was the first to be put into mass production and see widespread military use. Of course, you know that Enfield tried one out. Russia had some bullpup prototypes. Heck, some prototypes and concepts date back to before World War I. We did a video last year on a high-standard bullpup shotgun. All kinds of things. But this was really the first time it was successful. And they would beat the French with their FAMAS to the market by 1 or 2 years. And it was a little more advanced of a design with more going for it. That's probably why it stuck around a little longer. In the 80s, as the military started to use it, they did make a few changes and updates. In full auto, they added that roller to the bolt to improve things. They improved the firing pin, the extractor, some of the finishing techniques. They went to a closed-in flash hider. I don't like this one here. Pretty obvious reasons. But none of these really got a new designation. They were just new series. The first new designation would come in the form of the AUG A2. And that would go away from the one-piece casting to a two-piece system where they would have a removable optic bolted to the receiver. They would also go to a new pattern of cocking handle, more ergonomic, more durable. And that was kind of what we had in the 90s. In 2004, this is when the AUG A3 would appear. It replaced the removable optic with a fixed top rail. Now, of course, you could put anything you would want on the top rail, but this is the 1.5 power Austrian optic that was commonly available for it and with it, often known as the armored pickle. Extremely well designed optic, extremely heavy. I think it weighs about 8 pounds. Also, the AUG always had a last round hold open, but there was no control. Steyr AUG with the armored pickle. Held open.
I definitely got a face full of brass.
I knew you would.
Yeah, that one doesn't throw him forward at all.
No deflector. Well, the deflector is the stock.
Yeah. It deflected him, if that makes you feel better.
Into you. Like many European guns at the time, when a magazine was exhausted, empty, the bolt would simply hold back on it, and you would just pop your mag out and then touch your bolt, and it would go forward. Or you could insert a new mag and then do it. It just wasn't something they really considered. But by the 21st century, a control was the standard, and so one was added for the A3. A small thing, but something you hear people complain about a lot on guns that don't have it, so now it does. Now, the military version was always the 1.5 power green with 20-inch barrel. But for the police and special forces, a 16-inch barrel version was always there, and it was often done in black. They would do a 13.8-inch version as kind of a submachine gun size. And they would, of course, do a 24.5-inch version that we've talked about many times on this channel. That would be the LMG, or later DMR. All kinds of barrels, even the 9mm submachine gun the AUG Para or the AUG MP. We can talk about that in another video. So the A3 really brought it in to the 21st century, and they continue to expand the line, offering new stocks and new barrels. By this point, they do offer a version that takes NATO magazines, that kind of thing, Stanag mags. But the Austrian Bundesheer still issues the STG 77, and ultimately about 36 nations would adopt the AUG in one guise or another, including Australia, that would produce it at Lithgow under license. By the way, it was replacing the L1A1, another FNFAL flavor. So we kind of loop back around where we started with the A3 M1. Well, how is it different from the original A3 SA? Because on the surface they look quite similar. And that's one thing I think Steyr has done well. And they do kind of share that with Glock too. They make changes, but they tend to be pretty incremental and not just gargantuan. As years have gone by, they have offered all kinds of different colors. Originally, the AUG was just offered in OD green and black. Now you can get it in the mud color. You can get it in Arctic. In total, including special runs, they've offered about 8 different color configurations, including the cocking handle, foregrip, and stock, so it's an all-match thing. Heck, some of the time they even have a matching color base plate for the magazine. At least I know they do black and green. Like the A3 SA, the A3 M1, the multi-configurable, is assembled in the USA. The stock, the bolt, other components are imported as virgin parts from Austria, and they're mated with a receiver machined in the USA under license by Voltor. And they have a a cold hammer forged barrel. Now the A3 SAs were chrome lined. The original A3 M1s are also chrome lined. However, the newer versions aren't chromed. They don't have a chrome bore. They have what Steyr calls Manox coating. I'm sure that's great. What the hell is it? I don't know. It's like all this stuff. Anyway, different type of coating. But they still say they're cold hammer forged for what it's worth. And as I said at the beginning, they did switch to the 1/2 by 28 thread pitch. For a collector, that might be annoying, but I can also tell you it's extremely hard to find 13mm devices in the USA. So this is common, and it does come with the standard A3 tulip check washer. And of course, the front sling swivel is different. On the A3, it's inserted into the receiver here. For the M1, it's actually in a QD pocket. Hole. Steyr does that for either quick disconnect for a 2-point sling, or if a person wants to just run a single point sling, they can run this in the back and not have this flopping around in the front. That's good to be. And it comes with a Voltor swivel, which makes sense because Voltor makes the receiver. I should note that the M1 is kind of based on the, well, it was started off as the AUG A2 Commando, which was a version made with a scope and rails and what have you, special configurations, usually with either the 13.5-inch barrel or 16-inch barrel for the Austrian AUG Commandos. But that was a little different. That led to be, it was later known as the AUG A3 SF, Special Forces, used by quite a few countries. Well, that evolved into the AUG A3 M1 we have as a semi-auto. They're not the same, but there is a kind of a lineage there. And that's because it's a modular rail system based on the A2. The A1, had a fixed scope, as we already looked at. The A3 has a fixed Picatinny top rail. Okay? That's part of the receiver. It's not removable. Well, the A2 had a removable optic that could be replaced with a rail, although typically it was just done if the optic was damaged. Well, the M1 design, the SF type before it, went back to the A2 type of receiver where it's modular. You can remove and install either a rail or an optic. Now on the top, it's just a typical rail. But if you were to disassemble it inside the receiver, there are 3 bolts that are easy to access. You can unbolt the rail and replace it. And Steyr offers 4 major variants or varieties, and because it is modular, it opens up to lots more than that. The A3 here, the SA, with the rail on, you can mount anything, EOTech, Aimpoint, and this is the armored pickle as I introduced you to earlier. Very durable optic, very good optic, but it does have 2 disadvantages. 1, it sits relatively high, and 2, this is very weighty. Now part of it is it's just an overbuilt optic. That's true. But since the rail is part of the receiver, you're kind of stuck mounting something on it, which means it's going to be high no matter what. And when this was introduced, low mounts weren't as prevalent as they are today. And a lot of people like the 1.5 power original Swarovski optic from the A1. But of course, since it was integral to the receiver, if it got damaged, you're kind of out of luck. The M1 really cuts the cake perfectly. This is the long rail, named so because it's long. It has 16 slots and is designed for magnified optics, but anything will work. It's standard 1913, aka Picatinny. Alternative version is the short rail. It has 11 slots and is designed more for a reflex sight. And I do believe it sits a little bit lower because of that, because scope versus sight. And of course, to switch between the two, you just unbolt them. Now, if a person wants the more traditional optic, Steyr offers basically the original optic that would have been found on the A3 SF is either a 1.5 power or a 3 power, and instead of it bolting on top of the rail, you simply remove the rail altogether and bolt the 1.5 or 3 power optic directly on to your receiver. This saves weight, this saves height, this saves complexity. It's always better to have 2 things bolted together than 3 things bolted together, less chance of a failure. In addition, the current optics that Steyr offers do retain some rail sections on the sides and even on the top. I think there's 3, at least on the ones, maybe 2, but there's a couple of rail sections for either attaching lights, lasers, backup sights, what have you. It's the 21st century, rails have to be everywhere. So it is a really pretty neat and flexible configuration. And just as the A1, A2, A3 mostly differ in the way the optic and receiver are configured, the A3 M1 kind of carries that tradition forward. It's almost as if they could have called this an A4 and it would have kind of fit right in with the number of changes. Especially now that they've gone to 1/28 for the US guns and what have you. These are still usually with the 1 9 twist, although from time to time Steyr will do a run of 1 7 twist bores too. We'll let Jero give the AUG a go.
Hell, I was going to use that water jug again, you know.
You still can, it's like a shower. And let's end the video by letting the old AUG SA, like I said, this is actually a pretty early generation with the open flash hider, and it does not have the roller. Hang out with the most current. When I said at the beginning the AUG was really ahead of its time, I wasn't lying. Now, not all of its ideas maybe worked out for the best, but a lot of them are in common use today, like the can't talk. I've been talking a while, can you tell? Twilless barrel change system, front grip, integrated optic. They were always kind of ahead of the curve on optics. Synthetic magazines, synthetic furniture, reinforced, and just generally using alloy material, including castings. This is a cast receiver with steel inserts where needed. And of course, it's a short stroke adjustable gas piston system, something that a lot of modern AR people want to go to. And much like the AR-18, it uses a dual guide rod system. Yeah, and now you can argue the Bullpup configuration maybe isn't worth it. You certainly save space. With the 20-inch barrel here, this thing is really only about 32 inches long. And with the 16-inch barrel here, it's about 24 inches long. Excuse me, 28 inches long. Not bad at all. And weight is not bad. When you consider that with the Optic, this is under 8 pounds with a 20-inch barrel. And without an Optic and a 16-inch barrel, this is right around 7 pounds. Not exactly the lightest, but also not bad, especially for the day and time. And I would say most importantly, it worked. It was durable. I love the AR-18, AR-180, but time has revealed several flaws in the system. Could they have been fixed? Absolutely, but they never were. Time never really revealed much wrong with the Steyr AUG. There was that update in the 80s, between 82 and 86, where they did a few things to improve. But really, when you go from A1 to A2, you're just going away from a fixed optic to a modular one. That's a good idea. And then from the A2 to the A3, you're introducing a rail and an external bolt release. And from the A3 to the A3 M1, you're just introducing a modular rail and removable front sling swivel, and the most recent version's a more US happy thread pitch. It's just a very modular design, and Steyr really nailed it quite, and that's why it's still in service today. It is the Bullpup. I really like the Tavor and the X95. I really, truly do. Now, some of the other more commercial Bullpups that we've seen on the US market, honestly, not a huge fan of. A lot of them just don't seem built tough enough, or they're not reliable enough. The AUG and the Tavor, too, are both tough, reliable, and they are battlefield accurate. They're not DMRs, they're not sniper guns, but 2, even 3 MOA, absolutely effective for a combat gun. And again, Steyr has had a rocky road bringing semi-autos to us in the USA. In the 80s, really just a couple of years after the military was getting their select fire guns, they introduced the semi-automatic AUG SA to the US market. They also had a European civilian version they would introduce, eventually known as the AUG Z, and a semi-automatic police version known as the AUG P. And of course, you know, the Irish versions had the lockout system, the ALO. So they were pretty happy to configure however you want. But the AUG was banned by name in 1989. Not deterred, they introduced the USR And then it too was banned in 1997-98 when Clinton added to what Bush started. And again, it was banned by name. There weren't many guns actually banned by name at that time, but it was one of them. Lucky USR. So things are pretty quiet for a time, but I want to give Steyr credit. As soon as the assault weapons ban was lifted, they started bringing over fresh, high-capacity magazines. That's because the assault weapons ban passed in 94 no longer allowed mags made after that date for the civilian market to hold over 10 rounds. So a lot of the Steyr mags in the country were going for crazy money, and them importing them really helped the market out. But the guns would have to wait. As I said in the section about the A3, it was really Microtech, MSAR, showing there was so much interest in 2007 that kind of, I think, brought Steyr in. But even then, the poor company, their first partnership with Sabre back in 2009, 2010, did not end well. But amazingly, still not deterred, they formed a new partnership and began offering the A3 in 2012. And they continue to offer that line nearly a decade later as we cross from 2021 into 2022. And as with the M1 here, they have made updates. Although I'm happy that they haven't made it too much of a US version. CZ, IWI, guys, listen. This is how to make a gun for the US market. Make enough changes like the modular rail. Sure, go from a fixed to a QD sling pocket. And sure, even change the barrel threading. Heck, even offer it in 1-7 or 1-9 on and off. Offer different colors. But the way CZ did the Bren 2 MS and IWI is doing the Ace Gen.2, and they're just two examples, other companies have as well. It's too far from the military roots. The A3 M1 still very much has that pedigree, that history, all these years later. So that's why I'm really quite pleased with them, and just felt like doing an update video. As I said at the beginning, this time of year kind of always makes me think about the AUG, because it was, I guess, Thanksgiving of 2009 or 2010 that I first saw these available for purchase. You hear a lot about the triggers. They're not great, but you know, when you're at the range, triggers seem a lot worse when you're sitting at home on the couch versus at the range actually firing and having fun. At least that's my experience. So if you own a AUG, A1, A2, A3, 20, 24, 16, heck, if you're one that owns a 13.8 incher, love to hear about it in the comments and chat AUGs below. Let me know what you think. Appreciate you tuning in and hanging out. Hope everyone is starting off the holiday season well. And as always, if you could, please like, share, subscribe. And if you'd like to help support the channel, please check out the link to our Patreon page. This is Misha, and we'll catch you very soon next time.